Hey guys, this is Adam, and I'm here with Coach Kat Peters for the Mind Over Matter podcast. We've got a juicy, no pun intended, subject today. We're going to talk about deciding to not be natural anymore. And this is cool because out of all the other podcasts, I have not really covered this. And so this is a good opening to our audience. A lot of people ask me, do you work with enhanced athletes? And the answer is yes. I just never push it.
Yeah.
So it really does come down to it being the client's decision. And that's probably maybe our first stopping or starting point, I should say, is, you know, who do you think should use or who do you think should not use?
I mean, of course, it's definitely like a personal decision. Like, even if, I would think somebody should use. But so I'm gonna go out on a limb here, unpopular opinion. I know some people try to say that, bikini athletes shouldn't use. I'm going to disagree. I think that, if somebody wants to make that decision and they are in a place where they feel comfortable doing that, they've gotten their labs ideally, and they're not like a new athlete. If you're a new athlete, you obviously have a lot of potential for natural growth and, it's not really necessary. But if you've been training a long time, we all know that, that hypertrophy is going to drop off quite a bit after a while. And realistically, if you want to take it all the way, if you are not genetically an outlier and you can, you don't have those cards in your favor, if you want to go to nationals, you want to get pro status, it might be something that you have to look at regardless of division. Like that's kind of where I stand on that. But again, I don't push it, but I just think if you're going to take it all the way and genetics are not in your favor, training's not in your favor in terms of like how new things are, yeah, it's probably something to look at.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I just had a conversation with a client and she committed to 2 more years without. And and this is her first year. And
Mhm.
we had conversation about using. And I said, you're pretty new. I said, to be honest, unless you grow at a really high acceleration rate, like 90th percentile of what I see, with people who excel fast, you would probably have to use unless you're one of those people. But I
Mhm.
said, since I've never had you in off season before, let's at least try and let's go maybe 2 years and see if it's something you want to investigate down the road. So yeah, I think that's a great foundation for kind of starting this episode. And also, I'll go out on a limb and say some people just love the process of this. And even if they're not getting ready to be a pro or maybe don't want pro status, some people will say, well, you have no business doing that unless you're going to be a pro. And I guess my other side to that is, some people will casually smoke pot without becoming a pothead, like,
Right.
and just because you do something doesn't mean you have to do it all the way. And some people, even if they're not a competitor, have been in the gym and maybe they have a PR they want to break, and they may decide, hey, I do want to use some PEDs. And at that point in time, I think that it's just education's huge on, what is maybe healthier use versus not healthy use. So even beyond just competitors, we have to realize a lot of the general population, or even sometimes people who maybe should compete, are the ones who are using. And it's just kind of wild. We all have that guy at the gym. We're just like, why doesn't he compete? He's huge.
Yep.
And they're just like, I just want to get big, you know.
Yeah.
Um, Craig Goliath is still not competing, and I think he weighs like 360 right now. His goal is
Wow.
to hit 400, and just between, well, he's pretty public about it. He's never used HGH before, believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah. So Kind of wild to see that, a genetic outlier like that who doesn't compete anymore. But kudos to him. He's still following his goals and what he wants to do.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
so now that you've made the decision to, I always like to let people know once you make that decision to use, you don't always have to.
Right.
But however, this is probably going to be a big topic of the podcast. It's really hard to stop using once you start. And I'm not going to say that anabolics are addictive by any way, shape, or form, but you really do want to make sure you've got a good foundation for training and that you
Mm.
like to train and you're willing to train even when you're not on something. Because when it comes down to, smart use, I won't say healthy use, but smart use, there's going to be times that you go off of these androgens and you do need a break. So you have to consider, I still need to train. I still need to, you know, have my love and my passion for this. And they're definitely, depending on the drugs you take, which me and you are definitely going to get into down the road. We talked about doing a special episode on estrogen blockers, but man, it can really affect your mood when you're off, and it can affect your motivation and drive. So that's
Mm.
definitely a big thing to take into consideration.
Absolutely. And, I mean, just considering that, like, I mean, you want to maintain your results. Obviously, as hormones change, if you're coming off of something like that, like it becomes even more critical to have that foundation of, keeping your diet in check, keeping, your training in check, even if you don't feel like it. Just to kind of like not only like, I don't know, protect the investment, we'll say, because let's be real, we all know that, things like that are not particularly cheap, and you've put in all this time and energy, so you want to try to maintain what you can. So yeah, I think that's a huge point, really making sure that you have that foundation so that it isn't just like okay, well, I'm going to get these great results while I'm on and then they're gone when I'm off
Yep.
because I'm not maintaining.
You see that with people. They always categorize it as yo-yo dieting, but it's like
Mhm.
yo-yo everything.
Yeah.
They're on cycle and everything's on point, and then they're off cycle and everything falls to crap.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I've had clients like that, and you know it's crazy when that happens. They usually come to me already using versus having made the decision, but they're really at it when they're on and really not when they're off.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, which I understand because just psychologically, like, I feel like it's one of those things that, it is like, it's a motivation thing. Like, even if you were taking like some new supplement that was not necessarily black market, like you might just, it makes you excited because you're like, oh, I want to see what this can do. So I can kind of understand that. But yeah, you definitely have to have that love and passion for what you're doing. And I think it's worth mentioning because, both of us as coaches are very open-minded to both natural and enhanced athletes. We support you guys either way, and we will educate you either way, make sure that we're doing it in the most responsible way possible. Um, but it is definitely one of those things that I forgot where I was going to go with this. Sorry, my dogs are just driving me crazy because they're just playing, and I'm like, guys, come on now. We both know I have ADHD, and I just lost my train of thought.
I just had Sarah come in here and grab mine because I
Ah, there you go.
knew it wasn't going to work. The one was licking my leg and the other was trying to be in my lap. So
Oh, yep. See, there we go. It's dogs. They're not helping today. It's not an easy day.
no worries at all. Well, now that we've covered kind of deciding, I think there's some other things that go into deciding. First being family history. Do
Mhm.
you have a huge chance of heart disease? Does hair loss run in your family? Do you maybe already have a deeper voice and you don't want it to get deeper?
Mhm.
These are all individual things that you might have to decide on. And then secondly, I think lab work is definitely huge. Do you have things that are already elevated that, depending on what type of steroid you take, might make those things worse? So if any of our listeners have used and haven't had labs done, please go get those done. I'm getting a ton of girls who I can't imagine how long they've been running, but they're on these big teams and they do a cycle their entire, contest prep, and then they've never gotten the labs looked at to see, if they're healthy, which are probably not. And they end up oftentimes coming back with some um, pretty acute liver dysfunction, which usually leads to other things.
Mhm.
So getting the labs is really important. A lot of people say if you've never used before that you can go without the labs. And I'll partially agree with that, but it's just so nice to know your starting point. I would say most people generally are okay without, but it's really nice to know like you don't want to deadlift on concrete if there's a crack in your foundation. And, if there's not a crack in your foundation, you're probably going to be okay. But, why risk it? It's at the end of the day, you really do want to watch your health. So I really encourage people to draw the right lab panels or at least go in and have a conversation with your doctor and let them know this is what I'm planning on doing. And your
Yeah.
doctor can y- and this is where people get scared because they always think their doctor's going to like call the police on them. Your doctor's here to help you, and your doctor, if you went in with any other type of drug, they're going to try to send you to rehab or get you the kind of help that you need.
Mhm.
But if you're point blank and honest and say, I'm doing X, Y, and Z, they're going to say, well, let's draw lab work to make sure you're healthy enough first, and keep me in the loop. So if not, find a new doctor, because
Yeah.
remember, it's your choice to go to the doctor. They can turn you down too, but you can also just go to another doctor, and you will find somebody who will maybe I shouldn't say support you in your journey, but keep your health in check along the way. Believe
Yeah.
me, I've worked with hundreds of clients through this, and or we just either do private lab and then we
Mhm.
send the labs to a doctor, and that ends up working out really well too.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, it's completely like, it's good to be honest with your doctor. It's definitely necessary to get labs at some point, especially, the thing is I I know that like in general, information about anabolics and how you should structure a cycle and how you should do it safely is just very hit or miss. But especially for the girls, there's just not a lot of information. Most of the studies that have been done, it's been done on male athletes. Um, and so, you see women running way too much or the wrong kind of stuff for way too long. And you're not necessarily going to know that unless you have a coach that's educated. And that's where it does become really important to get those labs, because if you happen to be one of those people, knowingly or unknowingly, having a cycle that's structured maybe not in the most healthy, responsible way, you need to know what you did and how to fix it before you ever consider doing another cycle, because realistically, I would say most people are not a one and done sort of thing with steroids.
Yeah. Well, and then that opens up a whole can of worms too, because sometimes girls get things that aren't what they claim to be. So
Yes.
it's really important to make sure you have a good supplier. And then honestly, I really suggest for girls to test their gear, or get from a really good verified source. And you can send your gear out for testing. There's actually nothing wrong with that. And actually, I believe it was in Europe, they actually made it legal to transport small amounts in the mail, I believe, for testing, because there's been some big issues with recreational drugs out there where people were actually dying by trying to have a good time, and then they ended up not getting what they thought they were. So, it's kind of interesting to see some of that stuff happen. But yeah, making sure you have a legitimate source is key. And then, you opened up a good point where you hear of girls running too much.
Mhm.
And there's actually good coaches out here who do high dosages. And, in their defense, sometimes, like for instance, when I worked with a certain lab back in the day, it was under dose. So on paper, my girls' dosages got higher when we used that company. It was still, at the time it was Anavar we were using, but it only tested at like 7 milligrams per pill
Mhm.
versus the actual 10. So could we go up to actual 20? In some users we could, but technically because of the purity, it actually was not 20 milligrams of R
Mhm.
at that point. So that's something that you really have to pay attention to, because it really it was more like 12.5 milligrams of R versus it being 20.
Yeah.
And there are coaches who make great antidotal observations off of what's happening to a female. And, I've heard of cycles where girls were around 30, 40, 50 milligrams of R.
Yeah.
And when you hear that, you usually realize there's a shortage in what they're actually getting, or it's a really weak steroid. Because in two of these instances, the girls had no virilization at all. And I thought, there's no way you could be taking that much and not,
Yeah.
be this feminine essentially. So you always have to remember, not everyone in this game is out to help you. Sometimes the drug suppliers are there just to make a huge profit, and you definitely want to get away from those labs. And just like you were saying, how a lot of women don't talk about this, it's so important for women to talk about this so other people can get the right sources and
Mhm.
the right supplies. But I would say on paper with normal VAR, you're typically not going to be over 10 milligrams. And,
Right.
15, you start teetering with some virilization, depending on how androgen sensitive somebody is.
Right.
But then you also have division requirements and stuff like that. So um, I always try to put women in the division that would complement them best,
Yeah.
just due to their muscular structure.
Yeah, absolutely. But you brought up a good point about things being underdosed. And another thing that people don't talk about, is like we kind of touched on it a little bit of with testing. Um, you know, certain compounds are cheaper than others, like Anavar, for example, very expensive compound. A lot of the ones geared more towards like female use tend to be a little bit more difficult to come by, a little bit more expensive. So sometimes they're faked with things that are much stronger, that would very much negatively impact a woman. Like if you're a bikini athlete and you were trying to use Anavar and you get D-ball or something like that, we're going to run into problems.
Yep.
And I think that is, you know, if you're not going to test your gear at all, it's definitely something to keep in mind. Psychologically, a lot of clients, I like to go over those things. If somebody's making that decision, I'll give them the list of, hey, these are things that might happen. Probably won't, because, we'll be responsible and keep doses appropriate, but you got to know this might be what you're signing up for. It may or may not be permanent. These are the things that could go wrong, because those are psychological considerations that you have to make, instead of just, of course, yeah, like everybody wants bigger muscles and to look better and be more conditioned and like feel stronger and like great, fantastic. But there's the list of negatives that you need to be able to weigh out. Even if you are an athlete that's been training for a long time and you're very serious and you want to go all the way, you still got to make that consideration what you're willing to deal with potentially.
Hmm. Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the VAR being, actual D-ball before. I've
Yeah.
had that happen with a few girls who came to do lab reviews with me. And they're like, my coach doesn't deal with anabolics. And I started taking, and the one girl gained 8 pounds in a week and then three
Ooh.
more the second week. And I was like, definitely
That's
stop taking whatever
that's
you're
not
taking.
Anavar.
And I then said, I said, you don't need a lab review with me. You need a good source. And I won't source for people that aren't my clients, and
Yeah.
so she'll eventually come over essentially, which is cool. And get the right guidance that she needs, and at the end of the day, some coaches will be on board with this and some won't, but it is bodybuilding and it's your goal at the end of the day. So you do need a coach that will, talk to you about these things and
Yeah,
also
because
help you through the decision of what's right for you with your health and just educate you on the process.
yeah, and even just walking you through like what's a normal expectation, because like with that particular individual, right? Like if you've never used before and you're gaining 8 pounds in a week, you might think, oh, that's what it should be like. Whereas if you have a coach that's knowledgeable and like open to explaining what a reasonable expectation is, because as much as steroids get a rep for being this magical pill you take and you're just going to blow up, it doesn't work that way. It's
Right.
especially for like female cycles, again depending on the division, the dose, the compounds, etc. But like for bikini, for example, it gives you a little bit of an edge, but it's not necessarily a night and day transformation, and it's not going to be immediate. And so having somebody to be able to walk you through like, okay, this is what we can expect, this is what we shouldn't expect, like you can kind of navigate that a little bit better and know whether things are happening and working the way that they're supposed to, or whether you got something that you shouldn't be taking, and kind of figure it out from there.
Yeah, that availability is huge too. Like you said, a
Yeah.
lot of the beneficial female compounds are hard to find,
Mhm.
or sometimes you'll have a good source and then they're out of stock for a couple weeks. So I do recommend if you do go on cycle, make sure you have extra. Always order what you need for the full cycle. And
Yeah.
then always order your labs. Always make sure that you're following up on all that stuff, or you have a coach that directs you on when you should have those done and why. And somebody who one of the big things I'm seeing is almost everyone's reading labs now, but I just had a girl last week. Her coach just looked at her liver enzymes and totally ignored the hormonal aspect because there were a lot of things wrong there. And I was like, your coach may read labs, but they don't know what they're doing. So, don't be afraid to ask for a second opinion too. Um, and also, not all doctors are created equal. Like I had a girl the
Mhm.
other day, she was 19 and her progesterone was in the menopausal range, and he said that was normal. I'm like,
That's
not for 19.
well, I'm going to try to not go off on a tangent, but I feel like, especially for women's hormones, there's still a lot that like that's not understood, that I think we're kind of learning with like even like long-term use of birth control and seeing how that impacts women's hormones. I think it's kind of one of those things that like not every professional understands the nuances of how those ratios and things are supposed to look.
Right, absolutely. And that's why we've had such an uptick in our coaching because we work on that. And last week's birth control post went pretty much viral for the most part. So that's always good to have stuff like that happen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I think that also another good topic before we end this one is going off. Um,
Yes.
you know, and not even just going off um, you know, for short term, but I think there will be a point in everyone's life and they need to think about this is when they actually will stop using the drugs more than likely. And I think that that's a really good topic to cover because we
Mhm.
all are going to reach a day and age where we just say, hey, this isn't for me anymore. And hopefully people find that earlier than their body forces them out of it. But I think you should have an exit strategy on saying, hey, at this age is going to be when I, maybe decide to stop cycling, have an exit strategy, call yourself out on that. And then also, always realize that you can diet and exercise without, these things. And that's one of the big reasons when I told my client, hey, 2 years without, I said, because when you become a mother, I want you to realize you don't need Anavar or any of these other things to get the body you want to get on a national stage. And she will be a national level competitor. I said, I want you to credit yourself for that versus like a drug. And I said, if you decide the next season to use, I'm more all about that. But I said, I'd like you to see what you can do with just good diet and good training for right now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And some people, they're already like right there. And so you don't want to like overshoot, which, I think is like another thing to consider. Like, even if we're disregarding the fact that, like, yeah, at some point you're going to reach an age where you don't really, need to do that anymore. You shouldn't do that anymore, but also just within your division, if you get to that top of the tier where you're starting to push the muscularity boundaries and it's starting to grow out of your division, yeah, it's definitely something that you know you kind of have to psychologically prepare yourself for, that it's not going to be a lifetime thing, unless you're done with that particular division, or you're done with competing and you're like, oh well, YOLO, just gonna go out how I go out.
Right.
Then okay, more power to you. But yeah, it definitely, you got to prepare yourself for the fact that it won't be a lifetime thing. You can still look really good. And again, I think it comes down to what we were mentioning earlier, having that passion for training and for your diet. And as long as those structures are in place, you can absolutely maintain what you have and still continue to progress. You utilize just the usual stuff, nailing your diet and progressive overload. You're good.
Yep. I love it. I think this was a great one, a good little intro topic. We could probably get into more physiological things, but
Yeah,
I kind of like sticking to the mental aspect and help nudging people into the right direction depending on what they're thinking about. So,
absolutely. It's a fun topic.
well, thanks for joining us, and we will see you guys next week on the Mind Over Matter podcast.
Bye, guys.